Hi everyone, I'm Rachel and this is the story of how my parents uninvited me from our annual family vacation because there supposedly wasn't room for me, only to discover I actually owned the entire resort they had booked. What happened next changed everything between us forever, and I'm still processing it all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The notification sound from my phone cut through the quiet of my Denver apartment like a blade through silk. I was deep in reviewing quarterly reports for my consulting firm when the ping made me glance at the screen. What I saw there made my coffee grow cold in my hands and my heart skip several beats. It was a group text from my mother Patricia, sent to what appeared to be the entire Thompson family tree. The message was cheerful, decorated with mountain emojis and exclamation points, announcing the details for our annual family vacation to Mountain View Resort in Colorado. Dates were confirmed, cabin assignments were listed, and there was even a suggested packing list that included hiking boots and swimwear for the hot springs. I scrolled through the entire message twice, then 3 times, searching for my name among the cabin assignments. Amanda and her son Jacob were getting the Pine Cabin. Kyle, Stephanie, and little Lily were assigned to Aspen Lodge. My parents had reserved the main summit suite for themselves. Even my Aunt Catherine and Uncle Frank, who we saw maybe twice a year, had secured the Wildflower Cottage, but my name was nowhere to be found. I sat back in my office chair, staring at the screen as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. This was our family tradition, something we had done every single year since I was 12 years old. We had been going to Mountain View Resort for over 15 years, and I had never been excluded before. Not once. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled up to check the recipients list. Everyone was there: Amanda, Kyle, Stephanie, even Kyle's college roommate who had somehow become an honorary family member over the years. But my name was missing from both the recipient list and the cabin assignments. The rational part of my mind tried to find an explanation. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe Mom had sent a separate message to me with different details. Maybe there was some technical glitch with the group messaging system. But deep down, I knew better. This felt intentional, calculated, and devastatingly familiar. I tried calling my mother immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her voice, warm and cheerful as always, invited me to leave a detailed message, and promised she would get back to me as soon as possible. I hung up without saying a word. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up my email, searching for any mention of the family vacation that might have landed in my spam folder or gotten lost somehow. Nothing. I checked my calendar to see if perhaps the dates conflicted with something important I had scheduled, but my calendar was surprisingly clear for those weeks. I had even been looking forward to the trip, having deliberately kept my schedule light in anticipation. The silence in my apartment felt oppressive suddenly. The modern loft space that usually felt like a sanctuary now seemed too large, too empty, too quiet. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Denver and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The city sprawled out below me, thousands of lights twinkling in buildings where other people were probably having normal family conversations, making normal family plans, being included in normal family traditions. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my sister Amanda, sent only to me. "Hey, Raksh, just saw Mom's message about the trip. Are you coming? I don't see your name on the list." At least someone had noticed. I typed back quickly. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Mom's not answering her phone." Amanda's response came within seconds. "That's weird. Maybe she just forgot to include you in this particular message? You know how she gets with technology." But I knew this wasn't about Mom's relationship with technology. Patricia Thompson might be 58 years old, but she navigated her smartphone like someone half her age. She ran the family's social media presence, coordinated complex group events through various apps, and never missed sending perfectly timed birthday reminders to our extended family network. This wasn't a technical mistake. I spent the next hour trying to reach my father Robert, but his phone also went straight to voicemail. Kyle didn't respond to my texts at all, which was typical for him. By evening I had managed to connect with exactly no one from my immediate family, despite multiple attempts through different platforms. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities and past interactions, searching for clues about why I might have been deliberately excluded. Had I said something wrong at last month's family dinner? Had I offended someone without realizing it? Was this punishment for missing Amanda's birthday party because of a work emergency? The more I thought about it, the more a familiar pattern began to emerge. Over the past few years, I had noticed subtle shifts in family dynamics. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Inside jokes that everyone seemed to share except me. Holiday photos that somehow always managed to be taken during the brief moments when I was in the bathroom or helping in the kitchen. I had attributed it to natural family evolution, the way relationships change as people get older and their priorities shift. Amanda had Jacob to focus on, Kyle had his new marriage to Stephanie, and my parents were enjoying their grandparent role. I figured my absence from some family moments was simply the result of my demanding career and geographic distance. But now, staring at that group text message, I wondered if the distance had been more intentional than I had realized. The next morning brought no clarity, only more confusion. I tried calling Mom again over my coffee, and this time she actually answered, her voice bright and cheerful as if nothing unusual had happened. "Rachel, honey, how are you doing? I was just thinking about you yesterday." "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I saw your message about the Mountain View trip. I noticed my name wasn't included in the cabin assignments." There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to feel significant. When Mom spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, becoming more careful, more measured. "Well, sweetheart, we weren't sure about your availability. You know how busy you always are with work, and we didn't want to put pressure on you to commit to something when you might need to cancel at the last minute." The explanation felt rehearsed, like she had been preparing for this conversation. "But you didn't ask me about my availability," I pointed out. "You just didn't include me. We thought it might be easier this way, honey, less stressful for everyone. You know how you get when you have to change plans suddenly." "How I get?" The phrase hung in the air between us like a judgment, as if my dedication to my career was some kind of character flaw that needed to be managed rather than respected. "Mom, I've been looking forward to this trip." I kept my calendar clear specifically for those dates. Another pause. "Well, I'm not sure there's space anyway, dear. The resort is pretty booked up and we already have all the cabins assigned. Maybe next year we can plan better." "Maybe next year." The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. I was being told that there was no room for me in my own family's tradition, and I was supposed to accept it gracefully and wait for maybe next year. "I see," I said quietly. "Well, I guess I'll make other plans then." "That's probably for the best, sweetheart. You understand, don't you?" I told her I understood, ended the call, and sat in my kitchen holding my phone, feeling like I had just been erased from my own family's story. But what my family didn't know, what none of them had any idea about, was that 3 months earlier, I had received a very different kind of phone call. It had come from Mr. Benjamin Clark, the estate attorney handling my grandmother Dorothy's affairs after her death the previous year. Grandma Dot had been the original investor in Mountain View Resort, back in the 1980s, when it was just a small collection of cabins and a natural hot spring. Over the decades, she had quietly increased her stake in the property until she owned a controlling interest in the entire operation. When she died, she left everything to me, her youngest granddaughter who used to sit with her on summer evenings, listening to stories about the mountains and dreaming about the future. The inheritance had been complicated, tied up in legal processes and business valuations that took months to sort through. I had been so focused on maintaining my grandmother's privacy wishes and handling the transition quietly that I hadn't mentioned the inheritance to my family yet. Grandma Dot had been very specific in her instructions that the transfer should be completed discreetly, without fanfare or family drama. Now, sitting in my kitchen with the sting of exclusion fresh in my chest, I realized that my family had just uninvited me from a vacation at a resort that I actually owned. The irony was so profound it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the resort management portal that I had been learning to navigate over the past few months. Mountain View Resort was more than just a family vacation destination. It was a thriving business with year-round bookings, a full-service spa, conference facilities, and some of the most sought-after wedding venues in Colorado. I scrolled through the reservation system until I found the Thompson family booking. There it was, exactly as Mom had described in her group text. 4 cabins reserved for the exact dates she had mentioned, along with spa appointments, dinner reservations, and guided hiking tours. What struck me immediately was the booking confirmation details. The reservation had been made just 2 weeks ago, which meant this wasn't a long-standing family plan that I had somehow been left out of gradually. This was a recent decision, made quickly and deliberately without my input. I sat back and studied the screen, processing the full scope of what had happened. My family had decided to exclude me from our tradition, made their reservations at the resort I now owned, and expected me to accept the exclusion gracefully without question. For the first time since receiving that group text, I smiled. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Carlos Mendez, the resort manager who had been helping me understand the business operations since the inheritance transfer was completed. Carlos was in his 50s, had been working at Mountain View for over 20 years, and knew the property better than anyone. "Carlos, it's Rachel Thompson," I said when he answered. "I have a question about a reservation in your system." "Of course, Miss Thompson. What can I help you with?" "There's a booking under the name Patricia Thompson for next month. Can you tell me about the accommodation details?" I heard the sound of computer keys clicking. "Yes, I see it here. 4 cabins, party of 8 adults and 2 children. They've booked some of our premium accommodations, including the Summit Suite. Is there a problem with the reservation?" "Not a problem exactly," I said slowly, "but I'd like to make some changes to the booking. Can you walk me through what's possible?" Carlos spent the next 20 minutes explaining the reservation modification system, cancellation policies, and upgrade options. As the property owner, I had complete authority over all bookings, including the ability to modify, relocate, or cancel reservations as needed for property management purposes. "One more question," I said as our conversation was winding down. "How booked are we for those days? Specifically, is the presidential suite available?" "Let me check." More keyboard clicking. "Actually, yes. The presidential suite is available for all of those dates. It's our largest accommodation, with 4 bedrooms, a full kitchen, private hot spring access, and a dedicated concierge service." "Were you thinking of upgrading the Thompson party?" "Something like that," I said. "I'll call you back with specific instructions." After hanging up, I sat in my living room and really considered my options for the first time. I could call my family back, reveal the inheritance, and demand to be included in their vacation plans. I could play the victim, make them feel guilty for excluding me, and force an awkward reconciliation. Or I could do something more interesting. I thought about my grandmother Dorothy, who had built her share of the resort from almost nothing through patience, strategic thinking, and an understanding that the most powerful moves are often the quietest ones. She had taught me that dignity and grace were more valuable than dramatic gestures, but she had also taught me that allowing people to treat you poorly was not the same thing as taking the high road. I opened my laptop again and began researching something I had never needed to know before. What exactly were my rights and responsibilities as the primary owner of Mountain View Resort? The answer, it turned out, was that I had almost unlimited authority over the property and its operation. I could modify reservations, change room assignments, adjust pricing, and implement new policies as I saw fit. The business was mine to run as I chose, within the bounds of existing contracts and legal obligations. I spent the rest of the day reading through operations manuals, staff policies, and guest service protocols. I learned about the resort's exclusive concierge services, its private dining options, and its special accommodation packages for VIP guests. By evening, I had formed the outline of a plan. The next morning, I called Carlos back. "I'd like to make some changes to the Thompson family reservation," I said, "and I'd like to make an additional booking for myself." "Of course. What changes did you have in mind?" "First, I want to book the presidential suite for myself for the same dates as their stay. Second, I'd like to upgrade their dinner reservations to our most exclusive dining package, including the private chef service and premium wine pairing. Make sure they understand this is a complimentary upgrade due to their long history with the resort. Carlos sounded pleased. That's very generous. I'm sure they'll appreciate the special treatment. Should I mention that the upgrade is coming from you? No, I said carefully. Let's keep that surprise for when they arrive. Also, I'd like to review our policies for VIP guest services. Do we offer personalized welcome amenities? Absolutely. We can arrange custom welcome baskets, champagne service, private transportation, spa credits, really anything that would enhance their stay. Perfect. Let's put together something special for the Thompson party. I want their vacation to be absolutely memorable. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Carlos to design what would essentially be the most luxurious family vacation my parents had ever experienced. Every detail was carefully planned, from the welcome champagne in their cabins to the reserved seating at the resort's exclusive restaurant. They would be treated like royalty from the moment they arrived. What they wouldn't know until they got there was that their host, the person orchestrating their perfect vacation experience, was the daughter they had decided there wasn't room for. I kept my own reservation simple. The presidential suite, no special services, no fanfare. I would be there as just another guest, someone they might encounter around the resort during their stay. 2 days before their scheduled arrival, I received a text from Amanda. Are you doing anything fun while we're at Mountain View? I still feel bad that there wasn't space for you. I stared at that message for a long time, weighing my response carefully. Amanda seemed genuinely concerned, which made me think that the decision to exclude me might not have been unanimous. But she also hadn't fought for my inclusion or questioned the explanation about space limitations. I typed back, I'm planning a little getaway of my own, actually, somewhere in the mountains. I think it'll be exactly what I need. That sounds perfect. Maybe we can catch up when we get back and compare vacation stories. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about, I replied. That was certainly true. The drive from Denver to Mountain View Resort takes about 3 hours through some of the most beautiful mountain scenery in Colorado. I had made this drive dozens of times over the years, usually filled with excitement about seeing my family and anticipation for our week together in the mountains. This time, the drive felt different. I wasn't going as the excluded daughter or the forgotten family member. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was going as the owner of the property, someone who belonged there more than anyone else. Someone who had every right to be in that space. I arrived at Mountain View in the early afternoon, about 4 hours before my family's scheduled check-in time. The resort looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits with Grandma Dot, but now I saw it through different eyes. This wasn't just a vacation destination, it was a business, a legacy, and a responsibility that my grandmother had entrusted to me. Carlos met me in the main lobby, a rustic but elegant space with soaring ceilings, stone fireplaces, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the mountain views. He was exactly as I had imagined from our phone conversations, warm, professional, and clearly passionate about the resort. Thompson, welcome home, he said with a genuine smile. I have to say, it's been a pleasure preparing for your family's stay. The staff is excited to provide them with exceptional service. Thank you, Carlos. I know they're going to be surprised by the level of attention you've arranged. Should I introduce you to the key staff members who will be working with your family during their stay? Not yet, I said. I'd like to get settled in first and observe how things unfold naturally. If I need to interact with the staff while my family is here, we can keep it professional and discreet. Carlos nodded, understanding immediately. Of course, your privacy is our priority. He escorted me to the presidential suite, which was even more impressive than the photos had suggested. The space was enormous, with a living area that could comfortably host a small party, a gourmet kitchen, a master bedroom with a king-size bed and mountain views, and 3 additional bedrooms that could sleep 6 more people comfortably. Standing in that space, I realized the full absurdity of my mother's claim that there hadn't been room for me at the resort. The presidential suite alone could have accommodated our entire family with space to spare. The private hot spring access is through those doors, Carlos explained, gesturing toward a set of French doors that led to a deck area. You'll have complete privacy, but you can also access the main resort amenities whenever you like. This is perfect, I said. What time do you expect the Thompson party to arrive? Their check-in is scheduled for 5 o'clock. I've arranged for our premium concierge team to handle their arrival personally. I thanked Carlos and spent the next few hours settling into the suite and mentally preparing for what was about to happen. I had no intention of ambushing my family or creating a dramatic scene, but I also wasn't going to hide from them or pretend I didn't belong there. At 4:30, I positioned myself in the resort's main restaurant, which had a clear view of the lobby and front desk area. I ordered a coffee and opened a book, playing the role of a relaxed vacation guest while waiting for my family to arrive. At exactly 5 o'clock, I saw my father's SUV pull up to the main entrance. The next few hours were about to change everything between us, and there was no going back. Watching my family step out of that SUV was like observing strangers I happened to recognize. My father, Robert, emerged first, stretching his back and surveying the resort with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he had chosen well. My mother, Patricia, followed, already pulling out her phone to capture the moment, her movements animated with the excitement she always displayed when documenting family experiences for social media. Amanda climbed out of the back seat with Jacob, who immediately started bouncing with the energy of a 10-year-old who had been confined in a car for 3 hours. Kyle and Stephanie arrived in a separate vehicle moments later, with little Lily already chattering about the hot springs she had been promised. From my vantage point in the restaurant, I watched the resort staff spring into action with the precision Carlos and I had orchestrated. The premium concierge team approached my family with warm smiles and efficient professionalism, immediately taking charge of their luggage and check-in process. I could see my mother's surprise at the level of service. She kept looking around as if trying to understand why they were being treated with such special attention. The concierge team escorted them into the lobby with a ceremony typically reserved for VIP guests, which, thanks to my instructions, they now were. Carlos appeared at the front desk personally to handle their check-in, something that usually only happened for celebrities or major business clients. I watched my father's chest puff out slightly with pride as Carlos welcomed them as valued long-term guests of Mountain View Resort and explained the complimentary upgrades that had been arranged for their stay. The irony of the moment was almost overwhelming. Here was my family being treated like royalty at a resort where they had specifically determined there was no room for me, completely unaware that the person orchestrating their exceptional experience was sitting 50 feet away, calmly sipping coffee and pretending to read. I listened as Carlos explained their upgraded accommodations, the private dining reservations, the complimentary spa services, and the personalized hiking guide who would be at their disposal throughout the week. My mother actually gasped when he mentioned the private chef service that would be available for their cabin dinners. "This is incredible," I heard her say to my father. "I don't remember booking any of this." "Maybe it's some kind of loyalty program benefit," Robert replied, though he sounded as confused as she did. "We have been coming here for 15 years, Carlos smiled diplomatically. "Mountain View Resort values its longtime guests very highly. We wanted to ensure your family vacation was truly memorable." If only they knew how memorable it was about to become. I watched as they were escorted to their respective cabins, the staff carrying their luggage and chattering about the various amenities and activities available throughout the resort. Jacob was practically vibrating with excitement about the rock climbing wall, while Lily kept asking about when she could use the hot springs. Once they had disappeared into their accommodations, I finished my coffee and took a walk around the resort ground. The property was even more beautiful than I remembered from childhood visits with Grandma Dot. The main building housed the restaurant, spa, and conference facilities, while individual cabins and lodge suites were scattered throughout the property, connected by winding stone paths that meandered through pine trees and natural rock formation. The hot springs were the crown jewel of the resort, a series of natural pools fed by underground thermal springs, surrounded by carefully maintained landscaping that made the area feel wild and secluded while still being easily accessible. I had spent countless hours here as a child, listening to my grandmother tell stories about the Native American tribes who had used these springs for centuries before the land was developed. As I walked, I began to encounter resort staff members who recognized me from the management meetings I had been attending over the past few months. They greeted me respectfully but discreetly, understanding that my presence at the resort was to be kept confidential unless I indicated otherwise. The groundskeeper, an older man named Frank, who had worked at Mountain View for over 30 years, paused in his work trimming the hedges around the main hot spring pool to acknowledge me. "Good evening, Miss Thompson. Beautiful evening for a walk." "It really is, Frank. How are the grounds looking for the busy season?" "Finest they've ever been, I'd say. Your grandmother would be proud of how well the property has maintained her standards." The mention of Grandma Dot sent a familiar pang through my chest. She had died just over a year ago, and I still found myself wanting to call her when something significant happened in my life. She would have had very strong opinions about my family's behavior, and she would have appreciated the elegant way I was handling the situation. "She always said this place had a way of revealing people's true character," I said, remembering one of her favorite sayings about the resort. Frank nodded knowingly. "That it does. That it surely does." I continued my walk, eventually ending up at the small memorial garden that the resort maintained for Grandma Dot and the other founding investors. It was a quiet space with a bench overlooking the valley, surrounded by the wildflowers she had loved. I sat there as the sun began to set, thinking about the conversation we would have had about this whole situation. She would have been disappointed in my parents, but not surprised. Grandma Dot had always seen family dynamics clearly, without the romantic filters that sometimes clouded other people's judgment. She had worried about my relationship with my parents, particularly their tendency to take my independence and success for granted while expecting me to remain perpetually available for their emotional and sometimes financial needs. "You're too generous with people who don't appreciate it," she had told me during one of our last conversations. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the consequences of their choices." As darkness settled over the mountains, I returned to the presidential suite and ordered room service for dinner. The suite's private dining area overlooked the resort's main courtyard, giving me a perfect view of my family's movements as they explored their upgraded accommodations and began to settle in for their vacation. I could see lights on in all 4 of their cabins, and occasionally I caught glimpses of them moving around, unpacking and organizing their space. At one point I saw Amanda and Jacob walking toward the main hot springs, towels in hand, clearly eager to test out the amenities they had been promised. My phone buzzed with a text from Morgan, my best friend who knew about both the inheritance and the family vacation drama. "How's the mountain getaway going? Getting the relaxation you needed?" I smiled as I typed back. "It's been very revealing so far. I'm learning a lot about hospitality management." "That sounds mysterious. Are you being cryptic on purpose?" "Maybe a little. I'll have stories to tell when I get back. Can't wait to hear them. Enjoy your escape from family drama." If only she knew that I hadn't escaped the family drama so much as positioned myself at the center of it with complete control over how it unfolded. The next morning I woke early and decided to take advantage of the presidential suite's private hot spring access before my family began their day. The private springs were even more luxurious than the main resort pools, with higher mineral content and complete privacy from other guests. As I soaked in the warm, therapeutic water, I watched the sunrise paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and pink. This was exactly the kind of peaceful moment I had been looking forward to when I thought I would be sharing this vacation with my family. Instead, I was experiencing it alone, which was both sadder and more empowering than I had expected. Around 8 o'clock, I heard voices carrying across the courtyard as my family began to emerge from their cabins for breakfast. I dried off, dressed in casual hiking clothes, and made my way to the main restaurant, timing my arrival to coincide with theirs. The restaurant was bustling with other resort guests, creating the perfect cover for me to observe my family without being immediately noticed. I chose a table near the windows with a clear view of their preferred seating area, ordered breakfast, and settled in to watch the dynamics I had been excluded from. What I observed was both familiar and heartbreaking. The conversation flowed easily between Amanda, Kyle, Stephanie, and my parents, with the children adding their own excited commentary about their plans for the day. There was laughter, shared stories, and the kind of comfortable family interaction that I had always treasured during our previous vacations. But there was also a noticeable gap where I would have been sitting. No one mentioned my absence. No one seemed to wonder what I might be doing instead of joining them, No one appeared to miss my contributions to the family dynamic. It was as if I had been seamlessly edited out of their vacation experience without leaving any noticeable void. The realization was more painful than I had anticipated. I had expected to feel vindicated by observing their vacation from my position of secret power, but instead I felt a deep sadness about what our family had become and what I had apparently never really meant to them. My reflection was interrupted by the approach of their breakfast server, a young woman named Jennifer who I recognized from the staff meetings Carlos had been including me in. "Good morning, Thompson family," she said warmly. "I'm Jennifer and I'll be your dedicated server throughout your stay. I understand you have some special dining experiences planned, including tonight's private chef service." My mother looked delighted but confused. "This is all so wonderful, but I have to ask. We didn't book most of these special services. Are you sure there hasn't been some kind of mistake?" Jennifer smiled professionally. "No mistake at all. These are complimentary upgrades for valued long-term guests. Mountain View Resort likes to show appreciation for families who have been visiting us for many years." I watched my father's face light up with pride. He loved being recognized as important, valued, special. The upgraded treatment was feeding into his self-image in exactly the way I had predicted it would. "Well, we certainly appreciate it," he said expansively. "We've been coming here since our children were young. It's always been our favorite family tradition." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Our favorite family tradition. Except that this year, they had deliberately planned to continue the tradition without one of those children who had been young when it started. Jennifer took their breakfast orders with the kind of attentive service that comes with premium hospitality training. As she prepared to leave their table, Kyle called out to her, "Hey, quick question. How booked is the resort this week?" "We were hoping it would be quiet enough for the kids to really enjoy the hot springs without crowds. We're at about 70% capacity," Jennifer replied. "Busy enough to maintain good energy, but not so crowded that you'll have trouble finding space wherever you want to be." 70% capacity, which meant there was definitely room for additional guests, despite my mother's claims that the resort was fully booked and there was no space for me. After Jennifer left their table, I heard Amanda say something that made my blood run cold. "You know, I'm still feeling guilty about Rachel not being here. Maybe we should have tried harder to include her somehow." My mother's response was swift and dismissive. "Oh honey, you know how Rachel is. She would have found some work emergency or business crisis that required her attention. It's better this way. We can actually relax and enjoy ourselves without worrying about her stress levels affecting everyone else." Kyle nodded in agreement. "Yeah. Remember last Christmas when she spent half the time on her phone dealing with that client situation? Sometimes I think she uses work as an excuse to avoid family time anyway." The casual cruelty of their conversation was breathtaking. They had rewritten the narrative of my absence to make it my fault, my choice, my character flaw. They had convinced themselves that excluding me was actually a kindness, a way to protect both themselves and me from my own alleged inability to prioritize family time. I sat frozen in my chair, my breakfast growing cold as I listened to my family discuss my supposed shortcomings and their relief at not having to deal with my presence during their vacation. Stephanie, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "I don't know, you guys. Rachel has always seemed really committed to these family trips when I've seen her. Maybe she's just been going through a particularly busy period with work." I felt a flash of gratitude toward my sister-in-law, who barely knew me but was willing to defend me when my own siblings would. But Kyle dismissed her concern immediately. "You haven't known her as long as we have, Steph. Rachel has always been like this, ever since she moved to Denver and started her consulting business. It's like she thinks she's too important for family stuff. Too important for family stuff." As if my professional success was somehow an insult to them rather than something they might be proud of. My mother added the final blow. "I think this vacation is going to be much more peaceful without the drama. We can just focus on enjoying time with the grandchildren and reconnecting as a family, without the drama, meaning without me." I excused myself from the restaurant before I could hear any more of their conversation. I needed air, space, and time to process what I had just witnessed. I walked quickly toward the hiking trails that led up into the mountain forest, my mind reeling from the casual way my family had discussed my absence and their relief at not having to include me in their perfect vacation. The hiking trail was steep and demanding, which was exactly what I need. Physical exertion had always been my way of processing difficult emotions, and the mountain air helped clear my head as I climbed higher above the resort. About an hour into my hike, I reached a scenic overlook that provided a panoramic view of the entire resort complex spread out below me. From this distance, the buildings looked small and peaceful, nestled into the valley like a miniature village. I could see the hot springs steaming in the morning sun, the various cabins and lodges scattered throughout the property, and the main building where my family was probably finishing their breakfast. I sat on a large boulder and pulled out my phone to call Carlo. He answered immediately, as always. "Good morning, Miss Thompson. How is your stay going so far?" "It's been very educational," I said carefully. "I wanted to check in about my family's experience. Are they settling in well?" "Oh yes, they seem delighted with everything. The breakfast service went smoothly, and they're already talking about the private chef dinner tonight. Your mother specifically mentioned how impressed she is with the level of service." "That's good to hear." "Carlos, I have a question about resort policy. If a guest wanted to make themselves known to other guests during their stay, what would be the appropriate protocol?" There was a pause as Carlos considered the implications of my question. "Are you thinking of revealing your ownership to your family during their visit?" "I'm considering, but I want to make sure it's handled appropriately, without creating a scene, or making other guests uncomfortable. Of course, we could arrange a private meeting space if you'd like to have a conversation with them away from the public area, or if you preferred a more casual encounter, I could facilitate an introduction during one of their scheduled activities." I thought about the conversation I had overheard at breakfast, the casual dismissal of my character and the relief they felt at my absence. "Let me think about it," I said. "For now, please continue with all the planned services exactly as we discussed. I want their vacation to be everything we promised." "Absolutely. Is there anything else you need?" "Actually, yes. Can you send me a detailed breakdown of all the services we're providing for their stay, including the cost value of everything they're receiving complimentary?" "Of course. I'll have that to you within the hour." After ending the call, I continued sitting on the boulder, looking down at the resort and thinking about my options. I could continue to observe my family's vacation anonymously, letting them enjoy their week while I processed my feelings about what I had learned about their attitude toward me, or I could take a more active approach. The email from Carlos arrived just as I was starting my hike back down to the resort. The total value of the complimentary services my family was receiving was staggering. Between the room upgrades, private dining experiences, spa services, guided activities, and premium concierge attention, they were receiving over $15,000 worth of luxury treatment at no cost. $15,000 worth of hospitality that I was personally providing for people who had decided there wasn't room for me in their family tradition. By the time I reached the resort's main level, I had made my decision about how to proceed. I spent the afternoon in the presidential suite, working on my laptop and occasionally glancing out at the courtyard to track my family's movements. They seemed to be having a wonderful time, taking advantage of every amenity and service that had been arranged for them. Around 3 o'clock, I saw them gathered around the main hot springs with their bathing suits and towels, clearly planning to spend the afternoon enjoying the thermal waters. Jacob and Lily were practically vibrating with excitement, while the adults looked relaxed and happy. I decided this was the perfect time for my first direct contact. I changed into my own bathing suit, grabbed a towel and a book, and made my way to the hot springs complex. The main pool area included several different thermal pools of varying temperatures, along with comfortable seating areas and a small snack bar. My family had claimed a section near the hottest pool, with their towels and belongings spread across several lounge chairs. They were all in the water, talking and laughing while the children splashed and played. I chose a pool about 20 feet away from theirs, close enough to be clearly visible but far enough away to avoid seeming intrusive. I settled into the warm water with my book and waited. It took less than 5 minutes for Amanda to notice me. "Oh my God," I heard her say to the group. "That woman over there looks exactly like Rachel." I looked up from my book with an expression of mild curiosity, as if I had heard my name mentioned, but wasn't sure why. Our eyes met across the water, and I watched Amanda's face go through a series of expressions: recognition, confusion, disbelief, and finally shock. "Rachel?" she called out tentatively. I smiled and waved. "Amanda, what a coincidence. Are you guys having a family vacation here too?" The silence that followed was profound. My entire family stared at me as if I had materialized out of thin air, which in a way I suppose I had. My mother was the first to recover her composure. "Rachel? Honey, what are you doing here?" "I'm on vacation," I said simply. "I told you I was planning a mountain getaway, remember?" This seemed like the perfect place for some rest and relaxation. Kyle looked suspicious immediately. "What are the odds that you'd end up at the exact same resort where we're staying? That seems like a pretty big coincidence." I shrugged casually. "Not really. Mountain View is one of the most popular resorts in this part of Colorado. Plus, I have good memories of this place from visiting with Grandma Dot when I was younger." The mention of our grandmother seemed to catch them off guard. None of them had visited the resort with her the way I had, and they probably didn't even remember that she had brought me here regularly during my teenage years. "Well," my mother said, her voice carrying a forced brightness, "what a lovely surprise. Are you staying long?" "Through the weekend. I have a really nice suite actually. The presidential suite with the private hot springs access." I watched my father's eyebrows shoot up. The presidential suite was the most expensive accommodation at the resort, and everyone in the family knew I did well financially, but the casual way I mentioned staying there seemed to surprise him. "That sounds expensive," Kyle said, his tone carrying a hint of judgment that was unfortunately familiar. "It's worth it for the privacy and the amenities," I replied. "Plus, I figured I deserved to splurge a little after the year I've had." Amanda looked uncomfortable. "Rachel, about the vacation planning. When we really didn't think you'd be available, and by the time we realized we should have asked you directly, everything was already booked." I nodded understandingly. "Oh, I know," Mom explained about the space limitations. "Don't worry about it. I'm actually enjoying having my own space here. The presidential suite is incredible." The irony was delicious. Here they were, enjoying thousands of dollars worth of complimentary upgrades, while I paid full price for the presidential suite at my own resort, and they had no idea that their luxury treatment was being personally funded by the family member they had decided to exclude. "Maybe we could have dinner together one night," Stephanie suggested, clearly trying to smooth over the awkwardness of the situation. "That would be nice," I said, although I should mention that I have some special dining experiences planned. The resort arranged some really exclusive options for me, but maybe we could meet for drinks or something casual. My mother looked curious. "What kind of special dining experiences?" "Oh, private chef services, wine tastings, that sort of thing. The resort has been incredibly accommodating. They really know how to treat their VIP guests." I watched as this information sank in. Their own private chef dinner had been a highlight of their upgrade package, something they had been talking about with excitement all day. The idea that I was also receiving VIP treatment, possibly even more extensive than their own, clearly unsettled them. "Well," my father said finally, "we should let you get back to your relaxation. Enjoy your vacation, honey." "Thanks, Dad. Enjoy yours too. The hot springs here are amazing, aren't they?" I climbed out of the pool, gathered my things, and walked away, leaving my family to process the unexpected encounter. As I headed back toward the presidential suite, I could hear the urgent murmur of their voices behind me, clearly discussing what had just happened and what it might mean for the rest of their vacation. Phase 2 of my plan was now in motion. The next morning brought a shift in the resort's atmosphere that I could sense even from the privacy of the presidential suite. I woke early again, drawn by the magnificent sunrise views that the suite's panoramic windows provided, and noticed unusual activity in the courtyard below. Carlos was directing a team of staff members who were setting up what appeared to be an elaborate breakfast service on the main terrace, complete with white linens, crystal glasses, and an array of serving stations that suggested something far more sophisticated than the resort's usual continental breakfast offering. My phone rang just as I was trying to understand what I was witnessing. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," Carlos said when I answered. I wanted to personally confirm the special breakfast event we discussed for this morning. I paused, confused. I'm sorry, what special breakfast event? The complimentary gourmet breakfast experience for the Thompson family party. We had discussed arranging something memorable for their third day, and our executive chef prepared a special mountain cuisine showcase, featuring local ingredients and traditional Colorado specialties. I definitely had not discussed any such thing, but I recognized immediately what was happening. The resort staff, in their eagerness to impress what they believed were valued long-term guests, had taken the initiative to provide even more elaborate service than what I had originally planned. Of course, I said smoothly. I'm sure they'll be delighted. What time is the service scheduled? 8:30, which should give them time to enjoy the experience before their scheduled spa appointments at 10. After hanging up, I realized that my family's vacation was becoming even more luxurious than I had intended, thanks to the resort's culture of exceeding guest expectations. Part of me was impressed by the staff's initiative, while another part of me was amused by the irony that my family was receiving service that went above and beyond even what the actual resort owner had planned. I dressed quickly and made my way to the main restaurant, timing my arrival to coincide with my family's discovery of their surprise breakfast event. Their reaction was everything I could have hoped for. Amanda actually gasped when she saw the elaborate spread that had been prepared for them. Kyle stood with his mouth slightly open, clearly trying to calculate the value of what they were being offered. My parents looked simultaneously delighted and bewildered, as if they couldn't quite understand how they had become worthy of such treatment. The executive chef, a distinguished man named Pierre who I had met during one of my management orientations, personally greeted my family and began explaining the various offerings he had prepared. There were fresh pastries made with local honey, artisanal cheeses from nearby farms, house-cured meats, fresh fruit arranges that looked like works of art, and several hot dishes that showcased regional specialties. This is absolutely incredible, my mother said to Pierre. But we didn't order anything like this. Are you sure this is meant for us? Pierre smiled warmly. Absolutely, Mrs. Thompson. Mountain View Resort is honored to have such loyal guests, and we wanted to create a truly memorable culinary experience for your family. I watched from my table across the terrace as my family settled into what was clearly the most elaborate breakfast service they had ever experienced. The children were delighted by the special fruit kebabs that had been prepared just for them, while the adults sampled various delicacies with expressions of wonder and appreciation. What struck me most was how easily they accepted this level of luxury as something they deserved. There was no self-consciousness about receiving such expensive treatment, no awkwardness about the fact that they hadn't paid for any of these special services. They settled into the experience as if elevated hospitality was their natural right. During a lull in their conversation, I heard Amanda mention something that made my attention sharpen. You know, running into Rachel yesterday made me think about something. She said she's staying in the presidential suite, which has to cost at least $1,000 a night. When did she start having that kind of disposable income? Kyle shrugged. Her consulting business has been doing really well, plus she doesn't have a family to support or a mortgage to worry about. Single people can afford to spend money on themselves in ways that parents can't. The casual dismissal of my financial success as a product of selfishness rather than hard work was typical of Kyle's perspective, but it still stung. The implication that I could afford luxury only because I had failed to achieve the life milestones that mattered to him was both unfair and revealing. Still, Amanda persisted. The presidential suite seems excessive, even for someone doing well financially. Do you think she's trying to make some kind of point by staying here at the same time as us? My father looked up from his artisanal omelet. What kind of point would she be trying to make? I don't know. Maybe she's upset about not being included in our vacation planning, and this is her way of showing that she doesn't need us to have a good time. My mother's response was swift and defensive. That's exactly the kind of dramatic behavior we were trying to avoid by not including her in the first place. Rachel has always had a tendency to make everything about herself. The accusation was so fundamentally unfair that I had to grip my coffee cup to keep from reacting visibly. They had excluded me from a family tradition, convinced themselves that the exclusion was justified because of my supposed character flaws, and now they were interpreting my presence at the same resort as evidence of those same character flaws. It was a perfect circular logic that allowed them to remain blameless while casting me as the problem. Maybe we should invite her to join us for something, Stephanie suggested quietly. She's here anyway, and it might be nice to spend some time together as a family. Kyle's response was immediate and dismissive. She probably has her own agenda planned. You heard her yesterday talking about VIP dining experiences and private services. She's clearly more interested in her luxury vacation than hanging out with us. The irony was breathtaking. They were discussing my alleged preference for luxury experiences, while sitting in the middle of the most elaborate breakfast service the resort offered, paid for by me. Unbeknownst to them, I finished my own simple breakfast and decided it was time to take a more active role in shaping the day's events. I returned to the presidential suite and called Carlos to discuss my family's afternoon schedule. They have spa appointments at 10, followed by a guided hiking tour at 2, Carlos informed me. The evening includes the private chef dinner service that they've been looking forward to. Perfect. I'd like to make an addition to their hiking tour if possible. Of course. What did you have in mind? I'd like to join their tour as another resort guest. Can you arrange for me to be included without making it seem like I specifically requested to be added to their group? Carlos understood immediately. We can present it as a coincidence. Another guest who happened to book the same tour time. Excellent. And Carlos, I think it's time we discussed the possibility of my family learning about my ownership of the resort. How would you recommend handling such a revelation? There was a thoughtful pause. That would depend on your goals, Miss Thompson. Are you looking to maintain family relationships, or are you more interested in making a statement about their treatment of you? It was a perceptive question that cut to the heart of my internal conflict. Part of me wanted to maintain the possibility of reconciliation, while another part of me felt that my family needed to understand the consequences of their behavior. I think, I said slowly, that I want them to understand the full scope of what has happened here before I decide how to proceed with our relationships. I understand. In that case, I would recommend a gradual revelation during a private setting, perhaps during their final evening here. That would give them time to process the information without cutting short their vacation experience. That makes sense. Let's plan for that timing. After ending the call, I spent the morning working in the suite and occasionally observing my family's movements through the window. They emerged from the spa looking relaxed and refreshed, clearly having enjoyed their complimentary treatments. Amanda and my mother were chatting animatedly about the massage services, while my father looked more relaxed than I had seen him in years. At exactly 2 o'clock, I made my way to the hiking tour meeting point, a small pavilion near the base of the main trail system. My family was already there, along with their guide, an energetic young man named Jake, who specialized in the resort's nature program. I approached the group with a friendly but surprised expression. Oh wow! What a coincidence. Are you folks doing the afternoon hiking tour too? Jake looked between our two parties and smiled. Looks like we have another guest joining us today. The more the merrier. Are you folks all together? We're family, Amanda said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely pleased by my appearance. We just happened to run into each other yesterday. How wonderful, Jake said enthusiastically. Family hiking adventures are always special. We're going to have a great time exploring some of the most beautiful trails in this part of Colorado. The hike began with a moderate trail that wound through dense pine forests and offered occasional glimpses of the valley below. Jake was an excellent guide, knowledgeable about the local flora and fauna, and skilled at keeping the group engaged with interesting facts and stories about the area's history. For the first hour, the dynamic felt almost normal. We were a family hiking together, enjoying the mountain air and beautiful scenery. Jacob and Lily peppered Jake with questions about wildlife, while the adults maintained an easy conversation about the trail conditions and the view. But I could sense an underlying tension that hadn't been present during our previous family hiking trips. There was a careful politeness in how my parents and siblings interacted with me, as if they were making an effort to include me without seeming too eager or apologetic. The tension came to a head when we reached a scenic overlook about halfway through the hike. Jake had planned a rest stop at this location, which offered panoramic views of the resort complex and the surrounding mountain range. As we gathered at the viewing area, Jake began pointing out various landmarks and explaining the geographical features of the region. That building complex down there is Mountain View Resort, where you're all staying, he said, gesturing toward the property spread out below us. It's one of the most successful mountain resorts in Colorado, and it has quite an interesting history. Kyle seemed genuinely curious. What kind of history? Well, the property was originally developed in the 1980s by a group of investors who recognized the potential of the natural hot springs. But one investor in particular, a woman named Dorothy Henderson, gradually bought out the others over the years, until she owned the majority stake in the entire operation. I felt my heart rate increase as Jake continued his story. Mrs. Henderson was quite a businesswoman. She reinvested the profits back into the property, constantly upgrading and expanding the facilities while maintaining the natural beauty of the setting. By the time she passed away last year, Mountain View had become one of the premier destination resorts in the Rocky Mountains. Amanda looked interested. What happened to the resort after she died? That's the interesting part, Jake said with a smile. She left the entire operation to her granddaughter, a young woman who had spent a lot of time here as a child. The transition has been incredibly smooth because the new owner really understands the property and its values. I watched my family's faces as they processed this information. There was no recognition, no connection between the story Jake was telling and their own family history. They had no idea that Dorothy Henderson was my grandmother. Or that the granddaughter he was describing was me. My mother looked wistful. It must be nice to inherit something so beautiful and successful. That granddaughter is very lucky. She certainly is, Jake agreed. From what I understand, she's been very hands-on with the resort management. Really committed to maintaining the high standards that her grandmother established. Kyle snorted slightly. Easy to be committed when you inherit a business instead of having to build one from scratch. The comment revealed so much about Kyle's worldview and his resentment of inherited advantages, completely unaware that he was criticizing his own sister while she stood right next to him. Actually, Jake said mildly, I've heard she's quite accomplished in her own right. Has her own successful consulting business in Denver, from what the staff tells me. The resort inheritance was apparently as much of a surprise to her as it was to everyone else. I felt a flush of gratitude toward Jake, who was unknowingly defending me against my own brother's casual dismissal. As we continued the hike, I found myself walking alongside Stephanie, who had been quiet during the conversation about the resort's ownership. That's such an amazing story, she said to me. Can you imagine inheriting something like that resort? It would completely change your life. It would certainly be a big responsibility, I replied carefully. Running a business like that requires a lot of dedication and skill. Do you think you'd be interested in owning something like a resort? She asked. With your business background, you'd probably be good at it. The innocent question was so close to the truth that I had to be careful with my response. I think it would be fascinating to be involved in hospitality management, creating experiences for people, helping families make memories together. There's something really meaningful about that kind of work. That's a lovely way to think about it, Stephanie said. I bet most people just think about the money and prestige of owning a fancy resort. The money and prestige would be nice, I admitted with a smile. But I think the real satisfaction would come from knowing that you're providing something valuable for people, especially families. The word families seemed to resonate with Stephanie. She glanced back at her husband and daughter, then at my parents and Amanda with Jake. Family time is so precious, she said softly. I know Kyle's family has been coming here for years. It's created so many memories for everyone. The irony of her comment was almost overwhelming. Here we were, hiking through mountains on property that I owned, discussing the value of family memories being created at a resort that I was personally funding for family members who had excluded me from their tradition. Yes, I said quietly, family memories are incredibly important. It's sad when those traditions get disrupted or when family members feel left out of the experiences that matter most. Stephanie gave me a thoughtful look. Are you feeling left out of something, Rachel? The question was gentle and perceptive, and it caught me off guard. Stephanie barely knew me, but she had picked up on something that my own parents and siblings had missed entirely. Sometimes, I admitted, family dynamics can be complicated. They really can be, she agreed. But sometimes the complications come from misunderstandings that could be cleared up if people just talked more openly with each other. Before I could respond, Jake called the group together to begin the descent back toward the resort. The hike had lasted nearly 3 hours, and everyone was ready for some rest and refreshment before the evening's activities. As we walked back down the mountain, I found myself thinking about Stephanie's observation about communication and misunderstanding. Part of me wondered if she was right, if the problems in my family relationships could be solved through better communication rather than the elaborate demonstration I was orchestrating. But then I remembered the conversation I had overheard at breakfast, the casual cruelty with which my family had discussed my absence, and their relief at not having to include me in their vacation. Those weren't the words of people who were simply misunderstanding my perspective. Those were the words of people who had made a deliberate choice to exclude me, and were comfortable with that choice. By the time we reached the resort, I had reaffirmed my commitment to seeing my plan through to its conclusion. That evening, my family's private chef dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the main dining room, which had been specially reserved for their exclusive use. I had arranged to observe the dinner from the restaurant's private tasting room, which had a one-way view into the main dining area. The private chef dinner was a culinary masterpiece that showcased the best of Colorado mountain cuisine. Pierre had outdone himself, creating a multi-course meal that celebrated local ingredients and traditional cooking techniques, while adding his own sophisticated touch. I watched my family's faces as each course was presented and explained. They were clearly overwhelmed by the elegance and quality of what they were experiencing. My mother actually had tears in her eyes during the dessert course, apparently moved by the beauty and thoughtfulness of the presentation. "This has been the most incredible vacation we've ever had," I heard her say to my father. "I don't understand how we became worthy of this kind of treatment, but I'm so grateful for it." My father nodded in agreement. "The level of service here has been extraordinary. We'll definitely have to plan our future family vacations here." Future family vacation. The phrase stung because it was clear that these future plans would continue to exclude me, even after they had experienced the luxury treatment that I was personally providing for them. As the dinner concluded and my family began to head back to their cabins for the evening, I made my way to Carlos's office to finalize the plans for tomorrow's revelation. "How would you like to handle the disclosure?" Carlos asked when I explained that I was ready to reveal my ownership of the resort. "I think a family meeting would be appropriate," I said. "Somewhere private where we can have an honest conversation without other guests overhearing." "The resort's private conference room would be perfect for that," Carlos suggested. "It's comfortable, private, and has all the amenities you might need for a difficult conversation." "Good. Can you arrange to have my family meet me there tomorrow afternoon? Maybe frame it as a brief presentation about the resort's history and ownership structure." Carlos smiled. "I think I can make that work. Should I prepare any documentation to support your presentation?" "Actually, yeah. Can you put together a portfolio showing the resort's ownership structure, including the inheritance documentation and my current management involvement?" "Absolutely, this should be very interesting." As I walked back to the presidential suite that evening, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness about what tomorrow would bring. The revelation I was planning would either clear the air between my family and me, or it would permanently alter our relationships in ways that couldn't be undone. Either way, the conversation was long overdue. The morning of the 4th day dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of mountain air that makes everything feel sharper and more vivid. I woke before sunrise, unable to sleep through the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Today was the day I would finally reveal the truth to my family, and I found myself alternating between confidence in my decision and anxiety about the consequence. I spent the early morning hours on the private deck of the presidential suite, drinking coffee and watching the resort come to life below me. The staff moved with their usual efficiency, preparing for another day of providing exceptional service to guests who had no idea they were being hosted by someone who had been deemed unworthy of inclusion in their own family vacation. Around 8 o'clock, I received a text from Carlos confirming that everything was in place for the afternoon meeting. He had crafted an invitation that framed the gathering as an exclusive presentation about Mountain View Resort's ownership and management structure, something that would appeal to my family's curiosity without raising suspicions about the true purpose of the meeting. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda, sent to the family group chat that I had somehow been added to since my surprise appearance at the resort. "Can't believe this is our last full day here. This has been the most amazing vacation ever. So grateful for all the incredible experiences we've had," Kyle responded immediately. "Seriously, the level of service here has been unreal. We need to figure out how to afford this kind of treatment more often." My mother added her own comment. "I keep thinking there must be some mistake, that we're accidentally getting services meant for much wealthier guests, but the staff keeps insisting it's all complimentary for loyal customers." Reading their messages, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. They were absolutely right that they were receiving treatment typically reserved for much wealthier guests, but they had no idea that the wealth funding their experience belonged to the family member they had excluded. I decided to join the conversation with a message of my own. "It really is an incredible place. I've been having an amazing time here too. The resort definitely knows how to make guests feel special." The response was immediate but telling. Instead of enthusiasm about my positive experience, there was a subtle shift in the tone of the conversation. Amanda replied with a simple, "That's great," while Kyle didn't respond at all. My parents remained silent in the chat. It was clear that my presence at the resort continued to create discomfort for them, even as they were enjoying the luxury treatment that my inheritance was providing. I spent the morning taking one final walk around the property, seeing it through the eyes of someone who would soon be having a very different relationship with this place, and with my family. The resort had been a neutral ground for our family relationships, a place where we could come together annually and focus on shared experiences, rather than the tensions that sometimes arose in our day-to-day interactions. After today, Mountain View would never be neutral ground again. It would always be the place where I had revealed the extent of my family's willingness to exclude me, and where they had learned the true cost of that exclusion. Around noon, I encountered my family having lunch on the main terrace. They were gathered around a large table, sharing appetizers and laughing at something Jacob had said. For a moment, I felt a pang of longing for the simplicity of just joining them at that table, being included in whatever joke had just been told, being part of the easy family dynamic that I had always treasured. But then I remembered the conversation I had overheard at breakfast 2 days earlier, the casual cruelty with which they had discussed my absence, and their relief at not having to include me. The moment of longing passed, replaced by a steely determination to see this through to its conclusion. I approached their table with a smile. "Mind if I join you for a few minutes? I wanted to mention something about this afternoon." "Of course," my mother said, though I noticed she didn't make any move to create space for me at the table. I remained standing, which somehow felt appropriate given the conversation we were about to have. "The resort management has invited me to attend a special presentation this afternoon about the property's history and ownership structure. Apparently it's something they offer to long-term guests and VIP visitors. I thought you might be interested in joining me." Amanda looked curious. "What kind of presentation?" "Just some background about how the resort was developed, who owns it now, that sort of thing. I know we've all been curious about how a place like this operates, especially given the incredible service we've all been receiving." My father nodded thoughtfully. "That does sound interesting. When is it scheduled?" 3 o'clock in the private conference room. Carlos, the resort manager, will be leading the discussion. Kyle looked slightly suspicious. "How did you get invited to something like that? I thought you just booked a room here like any other guest." "I think it has to do with the level of accommodations I'm staying in," I replied smoothly. "The presidential suite apparently comes with certain perks and exclusive experience." This explanation seemed to satisfy his curiosity, while also reinforcing the point that I was receiving even more privileged treatment than they were, despite being the family member who allegedly wasn't important enough to include in vacation planning. "We'd love to join you," my mother said. "It sounds like a fascinating behind-the-scenes look at how this place operates." "Perfect. I'll let Carlos know that you'll all be attending." As I walked away from their table, I felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and dread that had been building all morning. In less than 3 hours, my family would learn the truth about who owned the property where they had been staying, who had been funding their luxury vacation experience, and who had orchestrated every detail of the exceptional treatment they had been receiving. I spent the afternoon in preparation, reviewing the documentation that Carlos had prepared, and mentally rehearsing the key points I wanted to make during the revelation. This wasn't about revenge or humiliation, it was about ensuring that my family understood the full scope of what had happened, and the choices that had led to this moment. At exactly 3 o'clock, I made my way to the resort's private conference room. Carlos had transformed the space into something that looked like a professional presentation venue, complete with a projector screen, comfortable seating, arranged in a semicircle, and a refreshment station with coffee and pastry. My family arrived together, chatting among themselves about their afternoon spa treatments and their plans for their final evening at the resort. They looked relaxed and happy, still glowing from the exceptional vacation experience they had been enjoying. Carlos welcomed everyone to the presentation with his characteristic warmth and professionalism. "Thank you all for joining me this afternoon. I know you've been curious about Mountain View Resort's operations during your stay, and I'm excited to share some of the property's history and ownership structure with you." He began with a slideshow that traced the resort's development from its origins as a small collection of cabins built around natural hot springs in the 1980s, through its evolution into one of Colorado's premier destination resorts. My family listened with genuine interest, asking questions about the various expansion phases and the business decisions that had shaped the property's growth. "The resort's success has been largely due to the vision and investment of one particular owner," Carlos continued, advancing to a slide that showed a photo of my grandmother Dorothy. Dorothy Henderson began as a minority investor in the original development, but over the years, she gradually acquired controlling interest in the entire property. I watched my family's faces as they looked at the photograph. There was no immediate recognition, which didn't surprise me. My grandmother had been Robert's mother-in-law, not a blood relative, and my parents had never spent much time with her after their marriage. Amanda and Kyle barely knew her at all. "Mrs. Henderson was quite a remarkable woman," Carlos continued. "She had a strong vision for what the resort could become, and she was willing to reinvest profits back into the property rather than taking large distributions for herself. She was also very private about her business dealings, preferring to let the quality of the guest experience speak for itself." My mother looked thoughtful. "Henderson, that name sounds familiar, but I can't place it." "She was also known for her close relationship with her granddaughter," Carlos said, advancing to the next slide. "Mrs. Henderson often brought her granddaughter to the resort during school breaks and summer vacation. The young woman spent a significant amount of time here, learning about the business and developing a deep appreciation for the property's unique character." Amanda shifted in her seat. "What happened to the resort after Mrs. Henderson passed away?" "That's where the story becomes particularly interesting," Carlos said, with a slight smile in my direction. "Mrs. Henderson left the entire property to that granddaughter, who had grown up to become a successful business consultant in Denver. The inheritance was somewhat unexpected, as Ms. Henderson had been very private about her estate planning." Kyle looked confused. "So some consultant in Denver now owns this entire resort?" "Not just any consultant," Carlos said, his smile growing wider. "The new owner is someone who understands the property intimately, someone who shares Miss Henderson's vision for exceptional guest service, and someone who has been personally involved in ensuring that every guest has a memorable experience." I felt my heart rate increase as the moment of revelation approached. My family was still listening with casual interest, unaware that the story Carlos was telling was about to become very personal. "In fact," Carlos continued, "the new owner has been here at the resort this week, observing operations and ensuring that our most valued guests receive the level of service that Mountain View is known for." Patricia looked around the room as if expecting to see a stranger who might be the mysterious owner. Is the owner here now? Will we get to meet them? Carlos looked directly at me. Actually, you already have. Miss Rachel Thompson, would you like to introduce yourself to your family? The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the air conditioning system humming in the background. My family stared at me with expressions of confusion, disbelief, and dawning understanding. Amanda was the first to find her voice. Rachel, what is he talking about? I stood up slowly, feeling steadier than I had expected. Dorothy Henderson was Grandma Dot, and 3 months ago I inherited Mountain View Resort. The explosion of reactions that followed was immediate and chaotic. Kyle started to say something, then stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. My mother's face went through a rapid series of expressions before settling on something between shock and embarrassment. My father simply stared at me, as if I had announced that I was from another planet. That's impossible, Kyle finally managed. Grandma Dot wasn't wealthy. She lived in that tiny house in Aspen and drove a 15-year-old Toyota. She was very private about her investments, I replied calmly. She built her stake in this resort over 30 years, reinvesting profits and gradually buying out other investors. She owned 68% of the property when she died. Amanda looked around the conference room as if seeing it for the first time. So you've owned this place the entire time we've been here? Yes, and all this special treatment we've been receiving. My mother began, then trailed off as the implications sank in. Was arranged and paid for by me, I confirmed. Kyle's face was turning red. Why didn't you tell us? Why this elaborate charade? The question hung in the air, and I realized that this was the moment I had been preparing for without fully understanding it. This was where I would either explain my actions in a way that opened the door to reconciliation, or where I would make it clear that their behavior had consequences that couldn't be easily undone. Because, I said quietly, I wanted to understand what it felt like to be excluded from my own family's tradition. I wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I was just another guest at a resort where you were receiving special treatment. And I wanted you to experience the irony of enjoying a luxury vacation, funded by the family member you decided there wasn't room for. The room fell silent again. Carlos, demonstrating his excellent instincts, quietly excused himself from the room, leaving my family and me alone to process what had just been revealed. Patricia was the first to attempt a response. Rachel, honey, you have to understand that we didn't mean to hurt you. We genuinely thought you wouldn't be available. And we were trying to avoid putting pressure on you. Mom, I said gently but firmly, I heard you talking at breakfast 2 days ago. I heard you say that this vacation would be more peaceful without the drama, meaning without me. I heard Kyle say that I use work as an excuse to avoid family time. I heard you discuss how relieved you were not to have to deal with my stress levels affecting everyone else. The color drained from my mother's face. You heard that conversation? Every word. Kyle looked defensive. We were just being honest about the dynamics. You have to admit that you've been distant from the family for years. I've been building a career and a life, I replied. The same way you built your marriage and started your family. The difference is that when you prioritized your new family, everyone celebrated and supported you. When I prioritized my professional development, it was interpreted as abandoning the family. Amanda finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. Rachel, we had no idea you felt this way, because no one asked. No one thought to include me in the conversation about family vacation planning. No one considered that I might want to be part of the tradition we've maintained for 15 years. You just made assumptions about my availability and my priorities, and then you made decisions based on those assumptions. Stephanie, who had been silent throughout the entire revelation, finally raised her hand tentatively. I'm sorry, but I feel like I should say something here. I've only been part of this family for 2 years, so I don't have the full history. But from my perspective as an outsider, it seems like there might be some communication issues that go both ways. Kyle turned to look at his wife with surprise. Stephanie, you don't understand the full situation. Maybe not, she replied calmly. But I understand that Rachel has just revealed that she's been incredibly generous to all of us, and instead of thanking her or apologizing for the misunderstanding, we're defending our decision to exclude her. The simple clarity of Stephanie's observation cut through the defensive reactions and forced everyone to confront the basic facts of what had happened. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Rachel, I owe you an apology. We all do. We made assumptions about your priorities and your availability without ever asking you directly. That was unfair and hurtful." "It was more than unfair, Dad," I said quietly. "It was a pattern. This wasn't the first time I've been excluded from family events based on assumptions about my priorities. It was just the most obvious example." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "We never meant to make you feel unwanted in the family." "I know you didn't mean to," I replied, "but intentions don't always match impact." The impact was that I felt like my presence was optional in my own family. Like I was valued only when I was useful but not when I was just trying to be included. The weight of this conversation was beginning to settle on everyone in the room. Amanda was staring at her hands. Kyle was looking out the window, and my parents were exchanging glances that suggested they were having their own internal conversation about what they had just learned. "So what happens now?" Amanda asked finally. It was the question I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. What did happen now? I had revealed the truth, made my point, and forced my family to confront their behavior. But I hadn't decided what I wanted the outcome to be. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I needed you to understand what happened and why it hurt. I needed you to see that my success and independence aren't threats to our family relationships, unless you choose to interpret them that way. And I needed you to experience what it feels like to receive generosity from someone you had excluded." Kyle looked up from the window. "Are you going to kick us out? Take away all the special treatment?" The question revealed so much about how he was processing this situation. His first concern wasn't about repairing our relationship or understanding my perspective. It was about whether the consequences would affect his vacation experience. "No, Kyle," I said tiredly. "I'm not going to kick you out. You're my family, and despite everything that's happened, I want you to finish your vacation and enjoy your remaining time here. The special treatment will continue through your scheduled departure tomorrow." "That's very generous," my mother said softly. "It's not generosity," I replied. "It's what family members do for each other, even when they're hurt and disappointed." The room fell quiet again, as everyone processed the implications of what had been said. We had reached a point where the truth was finally on the table, but none of us were sure how to move forward from here. Carlos knocked gently on the conference room door and peered inside. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to check if you needed anything for your discussion." "Actually," I said, "I think we're finished for now. My family probably needs some time to process what they've learned." My parents and siblings began to file out of the room slowly, each of them looking shell-shocked and uncertain. Amanda paused at the door and turned back to me. "Rachel, for what it's worth, I'm sorry, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished, both with your business and with this inheritance. Grandma Dot chose well when she left this place to you." It was the first acknowledgement from any of my family members that my inheritance might be something to celebrate rather than question, and it meant more to me than I had expected. After everyone had left, I remained in the conference room with Carlos, both of us processing what had just occurred. "How do you think that went?" he asked gently. "About as well as could be expected," I replied. "They're shocked, embarrassed, and probably angry, but they're also beginning to understand the situation from my perspective." "And how are you feeling?" It was a simple question, but it forced me to examine my emotional state in a way I hadn't done since this whole situation began. "Relieved," I said finally. "Sad, but relieved. The truth is finally out there, and whatever happens next, at least it will be based on honest communication rather than assumptions and misunderstandings." Carlos nodded thoughtfully. "Your grandmother would be proud of how you handled this situation. She always believed that difficult conversations were necessary for healthy relationships." As I walked back to the presidential suite that evening, I reflected on everything that had changed in the space of one conversation. My family now knew the truth about my inheritance, about my ownership of the resort, and about the elaborate vacation experience I had provided for them despite their exclusion of me. More importantly, they now understood that their casual dismissal of my priorities and their assumptions about my availability had real consequences, both for our relationships and for their own experiences. The question that remained was whether this revelation would lead to genuine change in how we related to each other, or whether it would simply become another family story that everyone would prefer to forget. Tomorrow would bring their departure and the beginning of whatever our family relationships would look like going forward. But tonight, for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe freely. The truth was finally out, and whatever happened next, it would be built on a foundation of honesty rather than exclusion and assumption. Standing on the deck of the presidential suite, looking out over the resort that was now truly mine, I realized that I had gained something more valuable than property or financial assets. I had gained clarity about my own worth and the courage to demand the respect that I deserved from the people who claimed to love me. Whether they would rise to meet that standard remained to be seen. The morning of their departure arrived with an unexpected knock on my suite. I opened it to find my mother standing in the hallway, dressed for travel but carrying a small wrapped package in her hands. "I was hoping we could talk before we leave," she said quietly, "just the two of us." I invited her in, curious about what she might have to say after sleeping on everything that had been revealed yesterday. She looked around the presidential suite with new eyes, understanding for the first time that this wasn't just an expensive indulgence, but a space that belonged to me. "I brought you something," she said, extending the package. "It was your grandmother's. I found it when we were cleaning out her house last year, but I thought you should have it." I unwrapped the gift carefully to reveal a small silver frame containing a photograph I had never seen before. It showed Grandma Dot and me, sitting together on the deck of what I now recognized as this very suite, both of us laughing at something off camera. I couldn't have been more than 16 in the photo. "She kept this on her nightstand," my mother said softly. There were other family photos in her house, but this was the one she looked at every day. The gesture was simple but profound, and I felt tears gathering in my eyes as I studied the image of my grandmother and myself sharing what had clearly been a moment of pure joy. "Mom, I want you to know that I didn't orchestrate this whole situation to hurt anyone," I said, setting the frame carefully on the coffee table. "I just needed you all to understand what it felt like to be excluded, and I needed to prove to myself that I deserved better treatment than I was receiving." She nodded, wiping at her own tears. "Your father and I talked for hours last night. We realized that we've been taking you for granted for years, assuming that your independence meant you didn't need family connection the way the rest of us do. I've always needed family connection," I replied. "I just needed it to be genuine rather than conditional on my availability or my willingness to prioritize family events over my professional responsibilities. We see that now," she said, "and we want to do better. We want to rebuild our relationship with you in a way that honors who you've become instead of trying to keep you in the role you played when you were younger." Through the suite's windows I could see my father loading luggage into their vehicles while Amanda and Kyle supervised the children's final preparations for departure. The scene looked peaceful and organized, but I knew that underneath the surface, everyone was processing the fundamental shift that had occurred in our family dynamics. "There's something else I want you to know," my mother continued. "Your father and I are proud of you. We're proud of your business success, we're proud of how you've handled this inheritance, and we're proud of the grace you've shown us even when we didn't deserve it." The words I had been waiting to hear for years finally arrived, and they meant everything, because they came after honest confrontation rather than before it. Over the next hour, the rest of my family took turns visiting the presidential suite to say their goodbye. Amanda brought Jacob, who was fascinated by the luxury accommodations and couldn't understand why anyone would want to leave such an amazing place. "Aunt Rachel, can we come visit you here again?" he asked with the directness that only children possess. "Absolutely," I told him. "You're always welcome here." Kyle's visit was more awkward, but there was a sincerity in his apology that suggested he had genuinely reflected on his behavior. "I've been jealous of your success for longer than I want to admit," he said. "Instead of celebrating your achievements, I've been looking for ways to diminish them. That wasn't fair to you." Stephanie lingered after Kyle left, and her perspective as someone newer to the family dynamics proved valuable. "I hope this experience helps everyone communicate more openly going forward," she said. "You've given them a gift by forcing this conversation, even though it was painful." The final goodbye came from my father, who had always been the most emotionally reserved member of our family. He stood in the doorway of the suite, looking older than I remembered, and spoke with a heaviness that suggested he understood the full weight of what had transpired. "I failed you as a father by not protecting your place in this family," he said simply. "I should have insisted that you be included in our vacation planning, and I should have recognized that your success was something to celebrate rather than something that separated you from us." The acknowledgement was more than I had expected, and exactly what I needed to hear. After they departed, I spent the day walking through the resort with Carlos, discussing long-term plans for the property and my vision for its future. The conversation helped me transition from the emotional intensity of the family confrontation to the practical reality of my new responsibilities as a business owner. "Your grandmother would be amazed to see how naturally you've stepped into this role," Carlos observed as we toured the spa facilities. "She always said that the resort needed an owner who understood both business and hospitality, and you clearly possess both skills." That evening, I received a group text from Amanda that marked the beginning of what I hoped would be a new chapter in our family relationships. "Thank you for an unforgettable vacation, and for showing us what real generosity looks like. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild the trust we damaged, but we're committed to doing better." 6 months later, Mountain View Resort hosted its first official Thompson family reunion, this time with my name prominently included in all the planning, and with everyone contributing to the costs rather than expecting free luxury treatment. The weekend was smaller and simpler than our previous vacations, but it was also more honest and more genuinely connected. My inheritance had given me more than financial security or property ownership. It had given me the power to demand respect from people who had taken me for granted, and it had forced conversations that needed to happen, but might never have occurred under different circumstances. Standing on the deck of the presidential suite during that reunion, watching my family interact with a new awareness of what it meant to include rather than exclude, I realized that Grandma Dot's final gift to me hadn't been the resort itself. It had been the opportunity to transform my relationships by transforming myself. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond the resort, reminding me that some challenges require patience, strategy, and the willingness to climb higher to gain a better perspective. I had learned to value myself enough to refuse unacceptable treatment, and in doing so, I had taught my family to value me as well. The resort continued to thrive under my ownership, but more importantly, our family traditions continued too, built now on a foundation of mutual respect rather than convenient assumption. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the courage to demand the love and respect you deserve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.